And this paves the way for our next speaker, Dr. Robert Kleinhenz, who will be bringing things closer to home and looking at where the regional Inland Empire economy is headed in the near future. Dr. Kleinhenz is economist and executive director of research at the UCR School of Business Center for Economic Forecasting and Development. He has nearly 30 years of experience analyzing the national and state economies and the economies of California's many diverse regions. He served as chief economist at the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, where he was a much sought after specialist for his deep knowledge of California's regions and its industries. Dr. Kleinhenz holds a PhD in economics from the University of Southern California. Please welcome Robert Kleinhenz.
Okay, guess I'll use this. Good morning, how are you doing? So, Chris and I talk about, we do our shop talk, we talk about our responsibility, our role as economists, and talking to groups such as yours, such as this, about what's important. And you heard, there are so many areas where you get the spin, you get the news, and we sort of shake our heads and we say, why are we talking about this when there are other much more important issues that we need to put on the table? So much of what you heard this morning, talking about Wall Street, talking about the national economy, that just seems so remote, but when I stand up here and talk to you, I'm talking about Main Street, I'm talking about the Inland Empire economy, and when you pull away the onion, when you pull away what you heard today from Chris, the fact of the matter is that the national economy is in good shape. It's improving. We got a little bit more wind behind our national sales over the past year by virtue of tax cuts and so on and so forth. All of that has played out here in the Inland Empire as well. And so I'm very pleased to talk about that to you. By the way, don't forget, you got to get your book if you didn't already pick it up. This will also be available online in the next day or so. Economists don't make such good proofreaders, so there are a few typos and things like that that we caught after the fact. So if you want to have the corrected version, you can get the electronic version online. Okay, so I'm here to talk about today's Inland Empire, and this works. This is good. This is really good. Okay. You heard about the fact that 10 years ago, we had so much upheaval. We had the Great Recession, the financial crisis, the mortgage meltdown. So many of these things played out right here in a huge and meaningful way. So it pays to spend a little bit of time talking about that. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. I don't want to dwell on the past so much as to show how, sort of like a phoenix, we have risen from those years and have really moved beyond that in a big way. But then we'll talk about today's economy, which industries are strong and continuing to give us the kind of drive that we have in the local economy. We'll take a look at local real estate, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking. You saw the demographic story for the nation and for the state of California. It's playing out here in the Inland Empire region as well. So we'll bring all that to the local picture over the course of the next few minutes. Now, this is a 10-year retrospective on so many of the indicators that were hit hard, or the sectors of the economy that were hit hard during the Great Recession. As you look at this, the middle of the diagram here has this gray shaded area which corresponds to the Great Recession. And if you take a look, and this might be a little bit hard to read, but sort of starting from the top, home price, the median home price in the Inland Empire actually peaked back in 2007. About the same time the median home price peaked at the state level and in so many other parts of California. You can see what happened, but it began well before the recession at the national level hit. You look down the graph and you can see the building permits, which is that green line there, actually peaked back in 2004. So long before we caught wind of the national recession, there were signs of a weakness, especially in the housing market, that showed up here. This was really important back a decade and a half ago because somewhere in the neighborhood of about half of the jobs that were added in the early 2000s here were coming from construction and real estate related activity. So when this very important part of the local economy began to show signs of cracking, it had a monumental effect all the way around. And then you work your way down, the next line down, home sales. Home sales peaked back in 2005. We were still really about 2.5 or 3 years away from the official call of the Great Recession at the national level. The one line that you can't really see that is moving a whole lot, but that's really maybe the most important one, that's non-farm jobs. That's that blue line. It didn't show a lot of adjustment, but the fact of the matter is that the unemployment rate shot up, you'll recall, to 14%, okay? So I don't want to dwell on the past, but, you know, these are things that we talk about. These are things that you talk about with your friends and your neighbors about how home prices have done this, home prices have done that. For years, I was a real estate economist, and, you know, no matter what I would say about the economy, what people really wanted to know was, how's the value of their home? And, you know, everything else was sort of secondary. So that's so very true for homeowners, and it's also true for other parts of real estate. Take a look at what happened. You know, from peak to trough, the previous peak to trough, we saw huge declines in home values. Do keep in mind that homes are the primary asset, the primary form of wealth for many households in the United States. So when their home loses value and loses value in such a big way, that's a huge hit. Never mind the fact that so many households were put out of their homes due to foreclosures and defaults during the Great Recession. We've come back big time. We're not quite yet at the pre-recession peak in terms of home prices, but whether you're looking at the local or you're looking at the state of California, we've come a long ways over these past 10 years. And some communities, of course, I'm sure you've heard here locally and certainly elsewhere around the state, we've seen home prices come back in a big way and just shoot right past pre-recession peaks. Just one last thing. So, you know, we saw so many homeowners lose their homes during the Great Recession. All of this has turned over the last several years. It took quite a while, but we're at the point now where if you look at the far right-hand side, the background levels of defaults and foreclosures are no different than they were back in the early 2000s. So what we're looking at now as we look at today's economy is this, okay? We've actually outpaced the state and other parts of Southern California in terms of job growth. This shows peak to peak. So previous peak to current peak or current levels of job growth, 16% higher now than during the previous peak, far outdistancing the state and other parts of California. This is great news. This is the part of the story that we need to take to heart. You heard the Chancellor earlier today talking about the need to plan ahead, to look 10 years out. And this is the foundation that you're building on as you're looking 10 years out and planning for that future over the next 10 years. The unemployment rate down at the same level, the black line being the Inland Empire unemployment rate. The unemployment rate the same level as the nation, record low, dating back over 40 years. And we've come so far from those 14% unemployment rates that we had several years ago, back in 2009, 2010. Yes, there. Job gains, some of the same things that you already saw Chris talk about. I've got to touch on at the local level. Consistently, for the last several quarters and the last several years, the Inland Empire has been among the top regions in terms of job gains for the state as a whole. You know, Los Angeles County has about 4.5 million jobs. These are wage and salary jobs. We have about 1.5 million wage and salary jobs. But look at how, whoops, that did that without my, there we go. Look over on the right-hand side. The Inland Empire, the job gains were not terribly short of, and in some months actually exceed those of Los Angeles County, which is by far the biggest labor market in all of California. So many things about what's happening here in the local economy are good, and it's not just that we stack up well against other parts of the state. Here we are in Southern California, the Inland Empire, and if you look at the color coding, we're among the fastest growing metropolitan areas, out of the 300 plus metropolitan areas, we're in like the top 30 in terms of job gains. As of the month of August, these are year-over-year job gains, but this has been a fairly consistent story, I would say, for at least the last 2 or 3 years. So we've got a lot of momentum as we leave 2018 and move into 2019. And so this is something that's happening not just in Riverside County, but also in San Bernardino County, both of these local economies. You know, it's still surprising that a region that has 4.4 million people is treated as one entire Inland Empire metropolitan area when each of them should rightfully be represented, if you will, in the numbers on their own. But so few numbers come out at the individual county level for the Inland Empire. This is one. Steady job gains over the last several quarters, all good news. And where are those job gains occurring? Well, if over on the left you've got Riverside County, over on the right you've got San Bernardino County. Construction is a big contributor. Leisure and hospitality is a big contributor. Logistics, also a huge contributor. If you look at the share of growth over the last few years, this is the last 3 years that we're looking at, 2015 through 2018, 1/5 of the growth in the Riverside County economy came from education and health. That's mostly healthcare. So everywhere you see education and health, most of those job gains are happening on the healthcare side. Over on the right-hand side, the same is true for San Bernardino County, but it didn't even make the top of the list. The top of the list in terms of that far right-hand side, the share of growth for the overall economy, for each one of these individual industries, 34%, 1/3 came from the transportation and logistics industry in San Bernardino County. And construction's playing a bigger and bigger role in contributing to the growth of the local economy. All of these things are great to report on for the local economy. And it's not just job gains. We need to keep in mind what's happening behind the scenes. Businesses are growing, they're multiplying in numbers. This local economy is healthy, it's expanding, we're adding jobs. We're seeing that people are, as you saw at the national, at the state level, earnings are on their way up. Same is true here. These are American Community Survey numbers that just came out for 2017, comparing 2017 against the 5-year 2012 numbers. So these are 5-year percentage changes. And as you heard, at the national level, some of the biggest wage gains are happening among the lowest income households or lowest income workers. You know, a couple years ago, we kept hearing that all of the job gains were happening in tech. All the job gains were happening in the high-wage industries, and the high-wage workers were getting those jobs. Well, that is so 2013, 2014. The last 2 or 3 years, we've seen middle-wage job gains on a consistent basis. We've seen low-wage job gains on a consistent basis. And as you can see on the far right-hand side, they've outpaced the gains among these other categories. So this is good news. This is, let's see, that should have been for Riverside County, for the Inland Empire as a whole. It was a mislabel, sorry. So taxable sales, tax receipts, this is, in my opinion, this is the way we gauge local spending, just as we saw consumer spending and business spending at the national level when we talked about GDP. And so we've seen solid increases here for the Inland Empire, actually outpacing the state as a whole over these last couple of quarters in the first part of this year. When you break it down and you look at where that growth is happening, we're getting significant contributions from the consumer sector as well as from the business sector. All of these numbers, I mean, you're being exposed to countless numbers during the course of my presentation, Chris's presentations, the commercial real estate numbers that will follow. But the bottom line is the undercurrent here. You forget about the numbers. We have 3 or 4 basic components of our economy. We've got the households, we've got businesses, we've got government, and we've got other entities, nonprofits, and so on. All of them are seeing growth. All of them are seeing opportunities to add to their ranks, to hire more people. They're having a difficult time doing that because the unemployment rate's tight, okay? But all of the segments of the local economy are moving forward at this time. That's what's represented here. And when we look for growth, and many of you have seen me list this before, when we look for growth, that economic development part of our mission at the center, you've got to look at the industries with an eye on what's going to make the local pie bigger, so those are industries that sell outside the region, and which of the industries are where we recirculate the incomes that have been earned by the local population. And this is not a perfect taxonomy, but it gives us a feel for which industries contribute to growth, increasing the size of the economic pie, and which industries are where we see more recirculating of expenditures and incomes that people have earned. So now it's time for the clicker to just, this is a union clicker. And after 50 minutes, it takes a 10-minute break. Then it gets back to work. So, and I say that because I was union at one time, and I know that that's the way it works. So I'm not slamming unions, don't pick on me. Okay, so quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on each of these graphs, so I'm just going to tell you what to look for. This is logistics employment, big sector of the local economy, one of the foundation sectors of the local economy, and we've seen record high numbers of employment here. We expect this to continue over the foreseeable future. Okay, when you compare us with the other parts of Southern California, the growth has just been phenomenal. The share of jobs in this sector continues to rise. The share of jobs in this sector in LA County has been relatively stable, despite the fact that it has the twin ports and so much infrastructure for transportation and logistics, but the growth is out here. And you know what direction this growth is going to be taking over the next several years, not just the next several years, but the next several decades. Okay, we've got 23 million people who live in the greater Southern California region. You look beyond that to the Central Valley, to the Central Coast, up toward Las Vegas, and over to Arizona. This catchment basin, in the large sense of the word, has tens of millions of people, millions and millions of business establishments, and the Inland Empire is a focal point for distribution throughout this sort of southwestern portion of the United States. That's going to continue to be the case. Now, this is the point, here we are at the Fox Theater, this is the point where you reach underneath your chair and you pull out those special 3D glasses, because otherwise you're not going to be able to really see this stuff. But this is just an economist. Wonderful graph. I got to explain this to you. What we're looking at are industries within that broader transportation and logistics industry. The bigger the circle, the bigger the sector with respect to employment. On the vertical scale, what you see is employment growth. So further to the north, the better. And then on the horizontal scale, what you see is the relative share of each of these industries, these subsectors. So the further to the right, the bigger, basically the bigger the advantage the local economy has compared to the state. So where do we want to be? We want to be up to the northeast, okay? And what you see here is that the strongest sector in logistics is warehousing and storage. I don't think that should be any surprise to those of us who drive around on the freeways here, and you just look off to the side and you see both existing as well as the newly built warehousing and so on, okay? So this is just explaining what's happening. This is not just a large industry, it's large relative to the state of California. It's large in terms of its concentration, even relative to the nation as a whole. So this is a huge sector of the local economy, and we're seeing substantial job growth in this very important sector. Manufacturing doesn't often get the kind of attention that it warrants here in the Inland Empire. We saw a slip in employment during the Great Recession, similar to what we saw at the state level, similar to what we saw at the national level. But if you look, we're not back at where we were before the recession, but you're seeing now that employment in manufacturing here in the Inland Empire continues to edge up. This is an industry that's not going away, it's not dying, it's around, it's transforming itself. It has to become more efficient in order to basically maintain its edge in both the local and the globally competitive environment. And what we're seeing is very slow progress because of the clicker. We're seeing that when you look at the value of what's being produced here in the local manufacturing sector, it's on the rise. Not yet back to pre-recession peak, but nor is that the case for the nation, nor is that the case for the state. So this is a key local sector. Okay, we're making stuff here, we're selling it outside the area, we're bringing income here, we're growing the size of the pie. Very important to the local economy. And again, pull out those special 3D glasses. The sectors that are contributing locally to the growth in manufacturing value are all over the board. You've got primary metals manufacturing, plastics and rubber, you've got furniture, wood products, chemicals. Okay, anything to the right is an area or an industry where locally we have an advantage relative to the state. Locally we have an advantage relative to the nation. So anything to the left, we have a slightly smaller concentration in those industries compared to the state and the nation. So huge growth opportunities, and again, we're seeing some really nice job gains over the long haul in these industries that are so important to the local manufacturing. Construction's on the way back, but while we're at a new peak relative to the post-recession era, with about 120,000 jobs, we're still shy of the pre-recession peak of 130,000 jobs. That's something we would probably expect to achieve over the next couple of years. And leisure and hospitality. So up to this point, I've kind of talked about industries that grow the local economy. A component of leisure and hospitality is what we have here: arts, entertainment, recreation. When you've got a big act that comes and performs here at the Fox Theater, and you bring people from all over, not just from the Inland Empire, that certainly contributes. When you have tourists who come and either use or visit Riverside, visit the mountains up in San Bernardino, all of that contributes. But most of the jobs that you're looking at on this graph are in food services, beverage, things like that. And that largely serves the local economy. So this is one of those industries. It's mostly a local serving industry. The jobs and the job growth are certainly welcome. They came later in the party to, this sector came later in the party to job gains compared to some of the other sectors of the local economy. But this is a really good sign that the local household and business sectors are healthy, because they're going out, they're hitting the food establishments, they're holding business meetings and conventions and things like that. You think, oh, this is just what business is. Well, yeah, and if you think back maybe 8 or 9 years ago when we were in the midst of the Great Recession, there were not that many people who were going out to business lunches. The opportunities for events such as this were just not nearly as numerous as they are today. So all of this is a manifestation of how well the local economy is doing at the present time. And it's showing up with the Ontario Airport, it's showing up with hotel activity. All of these things are pointing in the right direction as far as the local tourism sector is concerned. Huge growth opportunity going forward for both Riverside and for San Bernardino County. I'm feeling just a little bit staccato today with this thing, so bear with me. Now, room for improvement. We've been talking over these last 3 years about kind of taking the long view of the Inland Empire economy. The idea that while we have certain assets and strengths today that we can count on to give momentum to the local economy so it's going to grow in the future, we also want to look at tomorrow and those opportunities that might be out there. And one of them that we look toward is growth in industries that where you've got more higher educated individuals, technology related, stuff like that. And so the professional, scientific, and technical services sector, which is represented here, you can see that the employment's holding steady, but compared to the state, compared to the nation, it hasn't seen quite the same sort of growth. So this is an opportunity for the region to see where we can pick up the pace. And the university and other academic institutions can be focal points for making this happen. But we kind of have to figure things out and figure out how to put the best foot forward in terms of growing our local technology, growing our local technical sectors, to see how those can contribute to expanding the size of that economic pie in the future. And this is what I'm talking about. We've got a whole array of professional and business services. And again, anything to the right of that vertical line 1 means that we have a relative strength. There are not a whole lot of sectors in the local economy that fit into that category. So this is where we have an opportunity that we can work on over the next several years, and it does take time. We know that it takes time for this kind of growth to occur. Keep in mind that when you take a look at things like, you hear about how retail is under pressure. You hear about certain parts of the financial services sector of the economy that just aren't adding many jobs. That may be true for the nation. That may even be true for the state. Locally, when you've got population growth, each of these sectors of the economy have to add establishments. They have to add banks. They have to add grocery stores and so on to meet the needs of the growing population. So what we're seeing is that those sectors that are stagnant at the national level are actually seeing some growth here locally. So when you look at the individual industries, when you look at the local economy in its totality, it's not just doing well, it's doing great. It's actually outpacing the state, which is, a major contributor to growth at the national level. So in the scheme of things, this is a super good time to be right here in the Inland Empire if you're a local business, because you've got population growth that's going faster than the state as a whole, and you've got so much economic activity that you can tap into. Okay? Real estate, as you heard at the state level, so much of what's happening there is playing out here locally. Home prices are up, that's good, mid-single digits in terms of percentage increases for both of the counties. But look at the sales column. All the way throughout Southern California, you've got sales that are down. We've had sales decline in year-over-year terms consistently for several months here in California and each of its counties. My concern is not that the market's going to stall out. My concern is that it really never got out of, say, second gear and into third gear. When you take a look at home sales have really been going horizontal for quite some time here in California and locally, never really breaking above the normal plane. And here we are with interest rates going up. We've got home prices edging up, continuing to rise. And as a result of these things, affordability is starting to really show some signs of wear and tear, declining some, although this is still much more affordable than some of the other nearby counties. So when I look at the housing market, when I look at the for sale housing market, I say, through this economic cycle and where we are, we're just a few months away from the longest expansion on record at the national level. So I think we should be seeing somewhat stronger housing numbers than what we have seen. There are a lot of reasons why we haven't seen those strong housing numbers. Chris spoke a little bit about them, but you've got interest rates that are starting to rise just when incomes have really been taking off to the point where households might be able to buy, but at the same time, they're bumping into very difficult credit standards that are hard to overcome. These are the kinds of things on the demand side that are stifling demand. I would have expected more demand to come forth than has been the case. And on the supply side, you've heard it here, you've heard it time and time again, we're just not building enough. It's a true statement for the state, and it's definitely true here in the Inland Empire. So if we're not building, there's upward pressure on prices. You saw that on the for sale market side, and you also see here that rents are on the rise in the Inland Empire. And that's been the case since really the onset of the Great Recession, when many, many households were turned out of their homes and became renters, putting upward pressure on the rental market back then. And then with the population growth that we've seen over the last several years, it's put further and further pressure on the rental market here in the local economy. This isn't getting, you can see that vacancy rates have sort of leveled out, but anything below about a 4% vacancy rate in the rental market means that you're going to see rents go up. So if we're not building enough, not just homes, but multifamily, apartments and so on, vacancy rates will stay low, and these rates of increase over here on the right-hand side, and rents are going to continue to advance year over year over year. So I said, well, we're not building enough. This is a good way to get a picture of what I'm talking about. The Inland Empire contributed maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of all the building units that were produced back in the early 2000s. So this was a hotbed for new home construction, and most of it was single family, as you can see here in the middle of the diagram. Look at where we are today, nowhere close to that, and yet we've got among the fastest population growth of any counties, the 2 counties, anywhere in the state of California. So this is why we're seeing home prices advance. This is also why we're seeing rents continue to increase. I don't want to repeat everything that you heard earlier, but for so many reasons, we're seeing a housing market that's not quite up to snuff, not quite performed. It's good to see home prices rise. It's good to see people experience an increase in their equity, those people who lost equity during the Great Recession but hung onto their homes. There are many increasing numbers are above water, which is really good to see. But what we really need to focus on is not that affordable housing and housing affordability are not problems, they are problems, but the solutions are not things, as you heard, like rent control or making it easier for people to afford homes. You just got to build more homes. We've got to build more houses. We've got to build more apartments. We've got to have more multifamily. These are the things that are going to meet the needs of today's residents and tomorrow's residents. Now, I've been talking about this for years and years and years, not just here for the Inland Empire, but throughout the state. And even like when I go out for dinner with my wife and we sit with some friends and we talk about what's going on. At some point, maybe we end up talking about housing. I'm an economist, so I'm guaranteed of being quizzed about what's happening in the local economy, even when I just really want to sit there and drink my IPA, okay? So, so we talk about housing, and I say, well, we're not building enough housing. And my neighbor or my friend will say, well, yeah, I don't care because I like where I live and I don't want it to change, which is a very rational response. I mean, if you like where you live and you like the lifestyle, you like the community, you don't want that to change. But the fact of the matter is, my kids are not going to be able to live where I live. They are not going to be able to live here. They're going to have to move. And it's not because I want them to move. Today I want them to move. I've still got 2 under my roof. We were empty nesters for about 3 months last fall. That was great. Okay, so now I've got 2 back home. They'll move out eventually, but they're not going to be able to afford where I live. Your kids may very well not be able to afford where you live at the present time unless you pass your home on to them. This is the problem. The numbers that I cite here, the numbers that you heard from Chris, they're very real numbers, but the numbers don't resonate as much as facing up to the reality that our kids may not be able to live close to us when they get to the point where they can become homeowners. And even as renters, as high as the cost of housing is here in Southern California, there are many other places around the country that offer lower cost of living and have jobs. And so numbers of young people look seriously at these other places, and while the weather might not be as good there as it is here, they may choose to move. So that's what we need to do. If you are a housing advocate, if you think if you believe this story that we're telling you objectively, that we don't have enough housing, we need to build more housing, and we need to do that in order to accommodate our future housing needs, keep in mind that that is, your offspring that we're talking about, and we need to move quickly. Well, you already saw a graph like this. What we're finding is that because local communities have paid lip service to their housing needs numbers, the RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or Regional Housing Need Allocation, they've been paying lip service to those for decades. Yes, we acknowledge that we need 10,000 new additional housing units, but don't actually permit 10,000, maybe permit a few hundred. Okay, this has been going on forever, and so finally the state of California is recognizing that this is compromising our economic growth potential. We can't build enough housing. If we can't build enough housing, we can't lure enough workers. If we can't lure enough workers, we're going to have subpar growth at the state level and at the local level. This is the problem with not enough housing that people can afford to live in at all income levels, not just affordable. And so SB 35 and a number of other measures are really going to, turn the thumb screws on local communities and force them to face up to their housing needs and then have to take some action instead of just sort of shoving the report aside that they just filed. So we'll see how this plays out over the next several years, but it is an urgent need for all of us here in California to be able to accommodate the population growth that we're seeing, especially here in the Inland Empire. I mean, look over on the right-hand side, look at the population trajectory based on the Department of Finance projections out to the year, this is recent growth, I'm sorry, you'll see 2035 in just a minute. San Bernardino, both are growing faster and will continue to grow faster than the state as a whole. Over on the left, you've got the 10 largest cities and their rates of population growth. Okay, and let me go to this. You saw this at the national level, and let me show this to you at the local level. This is the total population starting in 2010, going out by projection to 2035. We're going to go in 2015, 4.5 million. We're going to get to 5.6 million by 2035, okay? Our economic engine is driven by the people aged 25 to 64. It's growing by a little bit, okay. But then you take a look at the very top, the younger population. I do speak occasionally to school groups, school officials, and so on. School-age population, statewide and locally, has been edging down for the last few years. It's going to start back up in 2020. But at the present time, we're looking at declining school-age numbers across the state. Now, look at that 65-plus number, doubling from the year approximately doubling from the year 2020 to the year 2035, okay? You heard about it from Chris. The national numbers are stunning. Well, same thing's happening here. This is what it looks like if you don't like numbers. There we go. The older share of the population is essentially doubling over the next 15 to 20 years, and the share of school-age population is edging down a little bit as a share of the total. So the whole idea about aging in place, the whole idea that large numbers of people are going to be here who are not in the workforce and occupying housing. I think about what this means and what what kind of examples do we have around the state even at this time. And there's some places that we work with, like out over on the Central Coast, there's some communities there that have next to no population growth. And they have large numbers of people who are in their 50s and 60s who occupy homes, and they're not moving anytime soon. And basically what's happening is the housing market's getting gummed up. We're just not able to accommodate the workers that should be coming to regions such as that, and workers who will be coming to regions such as this, because housing is just not keeping up with it. So much of this comes back to this notion that we need to build more. And you've heard me say this before, because this is the third year in a row that you've heard this sort of mantra that we need to build more housing. So I was hoping to get us closer to back on schedule. I hope I did so. And I wanted to just kind of wrap up with respect to what we see happening in the local economy. Just as the national economy will continue to grow here in 2019 with no real sign of recession, we expect to see continued growth to occur here in the Inland Empire economy. 4.5% unemployment rate is where we are right now. The labor force is growing faster here than has been the case for the state or for the nation. So we have some more room to grow. We'll see faster pace of growth, faster pace of job growth here in the Inland Empire. But this year we're looking at 3%. Next year we're probably looking at 2.5% to 3% gains in jobs, with the key contributors in terms of job gains basically being the usual suspects: logistics, healthcare, leisure and hospitality, construction. Large job gains will continue to occur in those industries Not that the other industries won't see job growth. They'll all see job growth, or nearly all of them, but most of the job gains will occur there. And I mentioned population-serving industries are going to see a lot of job growth. That's because so many communities in the Inland Empire will continue to grow and add population. We're chipping away at the housing problem. We're going to see a slight increase in the amount of new housing that is built this year by year end, although through the first half of this year we were just about on par with last year. And I do, where will your children live? That's really the thing that we all need to kind of, the question we need to address when we ask about how we're going to, or whether we should even bother to address our housing needs over the next 5 or 10 years. In the long run, you've seen the population growth trajectories. This is going to be, I like to say that the center of gravity for the Southern California economy and the Southern California region is shifting to the east with each passing year. And more you'll find that the Inland Empire is more important to the regional, that is to say the Southern California economy. It's going to get more attention from the other counties in the region, from the other large multi-county players here in Southern California. And we need to position ourselves as a region to be able to, tackle the challenges that are going to go with the kind of growth that we expect, and also we need to position ourselves to take advantage of the opportunities that it creates. So on that note, I'll say thank you and have a good morning.